So we will go through measuring for just a single garden area first, and then work on a bigger area. So the first thing that I do is I set the scale, which means that from wherever somebody's going to be seeing this area, I get in that space. So in this case, the star is a person standing at the window. And if you look out the window, and you're not pressing your face against the window and turning your head right and left, you're
You're
just looking out
standing
the window,
comfortably looking out the window.
and you say, how far can I see right to left? If that's where my garden is going to go, then I'd like to draw that whole area. And I estimate how far that is, 20 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet. However far, however big that area is in feet, I divide that number by how much paper I have. I have, at most, when I turn a letter size paper sideways, if I leave a little room for margin, I've got about 10 inches I can use. So I divide it by 10. So if it's a 40-foot area, I divide it by 4. I divide it by 40 feet by 10, because that's the amount of paper I have. I get an answer of 4, which means each inch of paper can be 4 feet. And that's perfect if I've got 4 graph paper that's 1/4 inch graph paper, because each square is going to equal 1 foot. But if I've got a 50-foot area and I divide it by 10, I need 5. Shoot, each inch is going to be 5 feet. And I've got 4 squares, and that doesn't work. So I might want to switch to
1 to 5.
I might want to switch to graph paper that has 5. Or I might want to say, why don't I just do this at 1 to 8? 80 feet. If I've got 80 feet, I can put 80 feet onto a 10-inch piece of paper. If I make each square be 2 feet, and you want to try to make your squares be an even number of feet. You don't want to be counting squares as 1.5 feet.
Oh, no, no.
Because we're going to count a lot of squares. You're going to count squares to figure mulch. You're going to count squares to figure, there's all kinds of reasons to.
It counts this. The graph paper is really, it really helps you out in more ways than just the drawing.
And while you're working on this, as we get further on in the scale drawing, it helps to have a firm idea in your mind what every one of those squares is. So figure it out at the beginning. And I'm most often working at 1 to 4 or 1 to 8 or 1 to 20, so that I got a set number. So I've got, it's divided into 4. So every one of those is 2 feet. Every one of those, every square is 2 feet, because I've set 1 inch is 8 feet.
So 1, 2, 3.
So I can count and say, all right, if I measure something 10 feet away, I count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's a 10-foot spread. And that's a lot simpler to do when you have started out at the beginning, setting your scale and saying, here's what I'm going to work with. And I write that down on the
Put it on the paper.
I cannot tell you how many times I've looked at something that I set down after being away from it for a day or 2 days, and I think, shoot, what scale was I using when I made this here? So write it down, right? I'm going to be 1 inch is 4 feet, or 1 inch is 10 feet, or whatever it is. Then decide which way is up. It's common to put north at the top of a scale drawing. I think it's more personal if you put your viewer at the bottom of the page. So you're looking up at everything that the viewer sees. It's always your choice. You can put anything anywhere you want to put it, but I like to be always looking at my garden as if I'm the main viewer, and I can see that everything in the first things that I see are my front row, and the top things I see are my back row. What did I say? Oh well, I guess it's at the theater now, where they make you pick your seats, and they always tell you the screen is up here. I go, wait, why is the screen? Is the screen up here? Or is the screen down there? Anyway, it's your choice where you want to put it. So at some gardens, it doesn't really matter all that much. At Teresa's garden, I helped a friend renovate this garden a couple of years ago, and so we did a scale drawing while we were working on it. They see it from this angle. They see it from the deck and from the house here. And so it makes sense that that one gets drawn this way. And yes, drawn that way. I can show you ugly things too that I do, not just pretty things. Because that stuff that you see right there is the primula that is marked right here. And that arborvitae is right there. It's the way that they see it. So I put this garden this way. North, in this case, is at the bottom.
Yep.
Then I choose a 0 point. This is the part that's really important. You need to be able to orient yourself, and somebody else is gonna need to orient themselves, or maybe remeasure. So you pick a stable, stationary item with hopefully a 90-degree angle, like the corner of a patio, the corner of a house, that you're going to always measure from, and you call that your 0 point. I call it the 0 point. If I don't have a 0 point, that bed that you design might be this way to the viewer. It might be this way to the viewer. It might be this way. You can't tell where it is because you've
Yeah.
only drawn it. You need to draw it in relation to something that's not going to move. So a square corner of a patio, it's a great place to put the tape measure and anchor it right there and say, I'm going to measure everything from this point.
It's a permanent point.
It's not going to change. So it might be the corner of a patio, corner of a house, or maybe it's the place at the left edge of the family room door wall. I say right there is where I'm going to measure everything from. I'm going to put a tape measure in the anchor the tape measure right there, and I'm going to stretch it out as close as I can get to perpendicular. So I make as much of a 90-degree angle between the tape and my fixed object as I can. And I'll give you a little bit later, we'll show you how to make sure that it's perpendicular. But I can measure and then say, okay, it's 28 feet till I get to the trunk of that spruce. So I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 squares. On 1 to 8 is 28 feet, and I can put a dot there and say that's where it is. That's where the trunk of that tree is, right out straight out from my 0 point. And then I'm not sure why I put this one back in there, so we won't do that. I use this. Sometimes your 0 point is real easy. You know, the corner of the sidewalk is a great place. You can measure everything from there. 8 feet this way, 8 feet that way, 2.5 foot shrub, 3 foot shrub. You're just counting squares to where you're going to place something. When you've got curves, it's a little more complicated, but sometimes, for instance, in a patio might be curved, but there's a squared off section of poured concrete in it, or there's a shed on the other side. Don't anchor on a curve because even if you put your 0 point, say here, you arbitrarily pick this point and you put in, I don't know, excuse me, you put in a heavy stake there that you're going to leave there and say, well, I'll always measure from there. If you always measure from there, how do you know whether you pulled the tape out at this angle or at this angle or at that angle? So you want to square because you're going to square off to some square point. Didn't have to do that with tree. Well, not really. Her garden runs parallel to the fence all the way down, so it's got an anchor all of its own. And she's just wanting to know where. She's always asking, what is that plant? So she just needed something that said what things were where. Okay. But it can be measured on its own and say, okay, I'm going to run a tape parallel to the fence all the way down. And then I'm just going to measure how wide the bed is. And I can walk along the bed from my tape measure. I can walk back and say, look at the tape measure and say at the 12-foot mark, we have zinnias and perennial geranium, and they go all the way to the 15-foot mark. And then the arborvitae goes from mark number, I'm making up these numbers. It goes from mark number 8 to mark number 11. And it's halfway through the bed. And I know that the bed is, I measured the bed at 6 feet wide, so I'm going to put it 3 feet back. So you just walk along, marking down what you see as you go along. And that mess of Siberian iris and columbine and stuff in there is one of the areas that we worked on first to say this area that goes from 6 feet to 10 feet on our measure is in need of renovation, definitely. It doesn't look anywhere near as good as it can look. And it's one of the areas that you see right there that now has sea lavender, hibiscus, and coreopsis all together, which make a much nicer combination to look at. And we knew they could fit because we knew we had from the 6 to 10-foot mark. Once you've got figured out where you're going to measure things from, then you can put in your focal point. And in our design classes, we always tell people, we design from a focal point. It's the first thing you're going to put into the garden. It's a place where you're going to decide where you want someone to look. So you're looking out that window and maybe you put your focal point over there because that background there's some nice bushes behind it as a background. Or maybe you put it over there because it takes your eye into a pathway you've got further down there. But you just place a focal point and you're going to measure to it from your 0 point. So, whoop. So if my 0 point is the corner of the patio, I'm going to measure straight out to it, perpendicular to the patio. How far over and how far up is it? And count squares. And you can literally you're doing just a garden, you can just count squares. I'm 28.
Yeah.
So I need 14 squares over and 4.5 feet up. I'm going to do 2.
2.5.
Yeah. And when you figure out where the focal point is going to be, you measure to it, mark it on your paper, and then I flag it in some way because I'm going to be walking around looking at this garden and I want to make sure where the flags that my attention is going in the right place. Because I've marked where my main viewer is. Now I'm going to walk around on paper and see whether the viewers from other angles, maybe they're out in the yard. If they look across that focal point, does it line up with the gas meter at the back of the house? Maybe I need to move it a little bit.
Just a touch too.
Yeah. So those secondary viewers, so my main viewer is looking out here, but the secondary viewer might be looking from over here. And on there, if I look at it to scale and put this thing into my scale of my yard, I might see look, there's a telephone pole back there.
Mm-hmm. And you don't want to
And I
pull the
don't-
eye there.
Yeah, I don't want to pull the eye to that place. So at that point, when you're designing a garden, you're ready to start going through the whole design. You can choose something to go in the focal point and draw it in place. Maybe it's a peony. I love peonies as focal points. They're good steady eddies. So you put it in and you know that a peony takes about 3 feet. So you're going to draw a 3-foot circle around that focal point. And then you're going to kind of step back to where the main viewer is.
And
Realizing I didn't need to double up on the pictures here because they're big enough. You have these pictures on your outline. So page 4 says here. So the main viewer is looking this way. I'm having a secondary viewer looking, and I look and I think, given the space that they're looking across, that seems like it's too small.
mm-hmm.
And if it's too small, that's when you realize, well, I think I need 3 peonies there, or I need a different item that's
Something
bigger
bigger.
or taller. But from this point, once I've got a focal point, I can move on to do the rest of the design. I can see things like when I walk around the secondary viewers, I can see that the people on the deck can't see the whole garden because the crabapple's in the way. And you'll be able to see that on a scale drawing because there's the trunk of that crabapple tree. You put it on the drawing and it's right in the way of people seeing things. And when I'm putting things in, so might decide to do 3 peonies instead of 1 peony, I'm not going to put those peonies in a straight line that way because my viewer is down here. And lining those peonies up that way is a little bit like looking at an art gallery as you enter it and trying to see all the paintings looking at an angle from far down at the end of the hall. I'm going to put those peonies, I'm going to arrange things for the viewer on this scale drawing and say there. Now that's a nice encompassing kind of group there.
And it's got a slight arc to it toward the viewer.
Yep.
That's arcing.
And then I can go on to the next steps. I can say, okay, now I need to frame it. Let's put a nice background behind it, something that covers the whole back. And I can adjust that if I've got a viewer that's over that away.
How did we lose the?
If I've got a viewer that's over to the left, I might say, okay, I need to shift that background just a little bit so that they are not blocked from seeing the peonies from that angle. And I frame it and keep adding things.
Yeah.
And now you might see that there's no edge on this garden. In the way that I do design, I don't draw the edge until I've figured out what plants are going in, and then I outline the area. You can do it a different way if you'd like to do it. Okay, what questions are there so far? Because that's the basics.
Yeah, we pretty minor questions. Jean is curious what design program you're using. I said, as far as I know, you've never really used design specific programs. But what drawing programs, what actual mechanisms do you use on the computer?
I've now been using just the Keynote, which is like PowerPoint, and
I guess that. Yeah.
and Photoshop. I used to use a drawing program called Aldus Freehand, which became
Mhm.
Aldus Illustrator. But it's not necessary to do that much, or CAD. I've used CAD. They are extremely powerful programs that do so many more things than you really need to have done. And they didn't save time. And they were they're like fancy pencils. They didn't save time. They, on a complex drawing, they allowed me to go in and make revisions later, maybe easier than redrawing the whole thing that I had drawn with a pencil or pen, or markers. But so I'm not using a program to help me design. I'm using the computer to help me draw more legibly than I could draw on my own.
And that's I think it was Teresa or someone mentioned that they use was it Teresa? Yeah, Teresa's used PowerPoint for years. Just in case anyone doesn't know, you don't have to use the same slide size in PowerPoint. You can set the slide to custom size whatever you want. So if you know if that's one of the things that's holding you back from just trying with PowerPoint, yeah, PowerPoint Keynote are pretty good options. Mary is curious how you show elevation change. And my apologies if I missed that at all with dog minding duties.
No, you didn't miss that. We didn't get into elevation changes. Oh, that's the picture I was gonna have you look for me. Steve was Cotty and Mike's, but okay. Um, I don't usually show elevation changes. Um, not on a plan view. It's all flat to me. If it's a hill, I'm measuring the area that's plantable, which even though it's on a hill, is still an area that's plantable. If you were going to show elevation changes, then you would show contour lines like you see on some plat maps, but I don't show those.
Yeah.
I just watched our oldest lamb open the baby gate in the room that is keeping the puppy in here. She opens baby gates now. Okay. All right. Excellent. Uh,
For a dog.
Audrey, it only took her 2 tries. Audrey is asking, trees tell you how tall they get, or at least they might lie to you about how tall they get. How do you find out how wide they get?
Use
That's-
Mike Durr's book.
That's in our gardener's growth planner, our last webinar, we explained to people that those numbers are in the best books. They're in Mike Durr, DIRR's Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. They're online. They tell you the height and the width.
Yeah.
And so you've got your growth rate that tells you how quickly they're going to get there, and we figure from there.
All right, I will drop a link in for that. And then we have an off-topic question. I think I'll save for Q&A at the end, and we'll finish the measuring.
Better than drop that in for finding
Yep,
out why they are. If you just go back to our website on the audience materials page, on the outline on the note-taking guide from last week, we had those references that give you those sizes of plants, the width as well as the height. They're right there on the note-taking guide, and there were like 4 of them.